the time with other parents.
So you did not call Mrs. Crumbley's son down to ask him about the videos. That's fair, correct?
I did as soon as I was able to.
Okay, so there's a time lapse between when you got the email and when you were able to speak with Mrs. Crumbley's son.
Yes.
Now, when you spoke to Mrs. Crumbley's son, you did not ask him to bring up the videos and let you watch what he was watching, correct?
Correct. I asked him what he was watching.
And you relied on the information he provided you about what he was watching.
Exactly as I would if I asked him to show me the videos, yes.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means.
I was relying on him to provide the information, which would be the same as if I had asked him to show the videos.
Okay, but if you saw the videos, you would know specifically what they look like. You are instead relying on what Mrs. Crumbley's son says was on the videos, correct?
Yes, I asked him what they were, and he told me what they were, and I relied on the information he gave me.
When he told you what the videos were, the information you relied on, did he tell you where he obtained those videos from?
No.
Do you have any idea, or did you ask, how long he was looking at those videos for?
I did not.
Now, on November 30th, so about an hour after the time period we just discussed, that was when Miss Morgan made you aware of this math paper that we've discussed extensively in this trial, correct?
Miss Morgan did not make me aware of the math paper. She made Mr. Ejak aware of the math paper.
I apologize. And then was it Mr. Ejak that made you aware of it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for clearing that up. Now, your testimony, you testified about the math paperwork, your observations, your thoughts about it on a couple of occasions over the last couple of years. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And when you saw the original photograph or the original math paper, we can agree that there is a gun drawn on the math paper.
Which one are you referring to as the original?
I'm speaking about the one, let me put it up on the screen. It would be, it's within Exhibit 160, and it's the prior to alterations, the math paper. Do you recall seeing this?
There you go.
Thank you. Yes, I was sent this in an email approximately 30 minutes into our meeting.
Okay, now when you saw, did you see the altered math test first, or did you see I called this the original. There's also one, because let's just be clear here. The shooter drew on a math paper, and what we see on the screen is that original drawing and writings. Is that correct?
What you see here is the photograph taken by the math teacher.
Of the original paper.
As it was when she had it, yes.
And then after she had it, the shooter wrote more on the paper, and we ended up with a second math paper that is essentially the original math paper plus some writings on it, correct?
Well, it's doctored.
Doctored, okay, right. So I'm gonna call this the original, and then I'm gonna call the other one with the additional writing the altered version. Is that okay with you?
Understood.
Okay, for the purpose of questioning. Okay, now I'm gonna open up the altered version as well, which was admitted as Exhibit 123, okay? So it's fair to say that you are familiar both with with the original math paper and with the altered one, correct?
I was able to look at both of them over the course of our meeting, correct?
And when you look at both papers, it's very clear that Mrs. Crumbley's son drew a picture depicting a gun, correct?
Yes, and the one especially that has no scribbles over it, I would not say that without context that it would be very clear on the altered one that that is a gun. Without context of the original.
Okay, I agree with you. So you're saying that the first photo on the left of the screen, it's clearly a gun, but when he altered the drawing, he crossed it off so much you might not know that had been a gun drawn there.
Correct.
Okay, when you saw the gun drawn on the sheet, seeing that gun, even just seeing the gun, that was not enough to make you believe that Mrs. Crumbley's son posed a risk to himself or other students, correct?
I wasn't sure whether he posed a risk to himself, so that is why I called in the parents.
Okay.
I was concerned, and I wouldn't call in parents unless I was concerned.
Okay, so you called the parents in because you were concerned, but we can agree that seeing the drawings, just the drawings alone were not enough for you to conclude there is something dangerous to other people.
When I take that in context, that is only a piece of the information I had. I also was looking at his demeanor throughout it. I also was asking questions to him, asking if he was a threat to himself or others, and taking his response of sadness, which is not a common threatening response.
Okay, and it's in all fairness, and you've had lots of training on this, correct?
I have had training on this.
So you've been trained, you've been formally trained on how to assess this kind of information and how to deal with it, correct?
Correct. And the number one way that I would be dealing with it would be to entrust the care to parents.
To entrust the parents with the care of their child.
Correct.
Okay. So there was talk at some point in the materials from this case about a step 1, step 2, step 3. Do you know what I'm talking about in terms of evaluating a suicide risk?
I don't know what direct thing you're referring to.
Okay, are there certain steps, if you do have concern, that you follow if a student is exhibiting what you called suicide ideation?
Well, suicide ideation is very different than actively suicidal.
Okay.
So I wonder if what you're describing might be an active suicide checklist as opposed to what we do if we see suicidal ideation.
Well, what do you do if you said in this case you were concerned about suicidal ideation, correct?
Yes.
So what do you do when it's a concern of suicidal ideation?
I call the parents.
Call the parents. Okay, and that's what you did, obviously, in this case.
Yes.
Okay, and one of the questions I do have for you, and I'm just going to page 72 from the civil deposition. This is just for you guys. Page 72 of the civil deposition is where I'm getting this question from. A drawing of somebody who is shooting a gun is just a drawing. That is something you've said before, correct?
I do not remember.
If there's not another person in the drawing, that's of significance to you when you see a picture of a gun, correct?
Are you referencing in regards to the math assignment?
Yes.
In the math assignment, if I see multiple people, I do have a different level of concern.
Okay, so explain for us then what, and I don't know why that clicked off, but it's gonna pop back up. So explain to us what you mean by when you see another person or you don't see another person. Tell us what you see up here and how things would change if there were multiple people.
Well, I see one body. If I see somebody holding the gun in one body, my response is completely different.
Okay, so, and have you had training about looking at drawings by students and being able to take them into account when you're assessing situations?
I've had training in how to assess situations. I would not say I've had training in students' drawings.
Okay, but your conclusion was that because there's not a second person, seeing a gun on these pages in and of itself alone would not be enough to cause you concern.
Again, you're taking a very small piece of that. That is just a piece of what I saw in totality.
Okay, so you were asked before, you didn't see anything that suggested that there was a gun in the hand on this drawing, and your answer was no, correct?
In regards to this drawing,
Yes.
I do not see a gun in someone's hand on this drawing.
Okay, you were asked, that's a pretty important thing for you to know or not. Do you agree? Your answer was a drawing of somebody who is shooting a gun. Still, there's not another person. It's just a drawing. Do you recall testifying that way when you were previously asked about this drawing?
That was not in regards to this drawing.
It's fair to say that, which drawing was it in regards to then?
Not this one.
So you testified at a deposition on September 14th of 2022, correct?
I believe that was the date, correct?
And there are, the discussion prior to those questions was about the drawing in class that day, and the drawing being on the violent side. Do you recall that?
In regards to the email from the teacher that we discussed earlier, yes.
Okay, so at the end of the day, your prior testimony that seeing a drawing of a gun, that in and of itself, by itself, does not create enough of a concern that something more sinister is happening, correct?
We are looking at a total picture and not just a piece of a picture.
And you are trained to look at that total picture, correct?
I took the approach to look at the total picture.
In addition to looking at the total picture, and by picture I'm saying the picture that was drawn, you also look at the picture in terms of the demeanor of the person you're speaking to, the way the person is presenting, the way the student is behaving, a number of factors, correct?
I try to take in as much information as I can.
And taking in as much information as you can is certainly something that you have learned to do through, in addition to your training, your experience, correct?
Yes.
This is not the first time that you're calling a student down to your office to talk to them about something that may be problematic, correct?
Well, and that's why I was not the only one in the meeting, was I didn't want to take the approach of I was the only one making the call. I also had our person in charge of discipline with me.
And so you are in the meeting, and when you're saying the person in charge of discipline, you're talking about Mr. Ejak, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Ejak is going to testify, but your understanding is that Mr. Ejak has also had training on dealing with these kind of situations, correct?
I do not know his total background.
You would assume that as the assistant dean of school of the school,
I'm just
he's had
object to the
training.
question of this witness. Mr. Ejak will testify. It's appropriate for him.
I'll withdraw the question, Your Honor.
Yeah, he can answer that, Mr. Ejak.
Now, when you asked Mrs. Crumbley's son about the videos he was watching, he indicated to you that he wanted to be a video game designer, correct?
He did.
And he actually had a detailed conversation with you about an opportunity that Oxford has for students to get training to become video game designers, correct?
I showed him a program through Oakland Schools that could lead him into that area.
Okay, so you and Mrs. Crumbley's son had a conversation about if he was interested in pursuing a video game designer career. The school system even has opportunities for him to further that interest.
Yes.
And in that conversation, when you were speaking to Mrs. Crumbley's son, you believed he had a genuine interest in this video game designing future.
Yes, I did.
If you believed that Mrs. Crumbley's son did not have a genuine interest in becoming a designer, or that he really was drawing pictures with a plan to hurt people, you would have certainly taken different actions, correct?
If I believed that he was a threat to people, I would have taken different actions.
Now, you testified about when the parents came in and this meeting that you had with them. You obviously recall that, correct?
I do recall the meeting.
Now, when you met with the parents, they were present for approximately 12 minutes out of the entire time you spent with Mrs. Crumbley's son.
Yes.
And you testified that you were with Mrs. Crumbley's son for approximately an hour and a half, correct?
Correct.
So it would have been an hour and a half, including those 12 minutes.
Yes.
Now, prior to that hour and a half spent with Mrs. Crumbley's son, you had never spent any kind of time, really, aside from short conversations with Mrs. Crumbley's son, correct?
Correct.
And you also had never spent time with Mr. or Mrs. Crumbley talking to them about or handling matters regarding their son, correct?
Correct.
So when Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley arrived at the school and were communicating with you on this issue, these are not parents that you're seeing on a weekly or even monthly basis, correct?
Correct.
I imagine at the school there are other situations where you have students that are essentially frequent flyers down to your office, correct?
I do know some students more than others.
And some of the students that you deal with more frequently, you're also used to dealing with their parents on a more frequent basis, correct?
Potentially correct.
And the more times you have to deal with the parents and the more times you have to deal with their child, the more you get to know about the family and the dynamics of the relationships, correct?
Yes, I would hope the more time I spend with someone, the better I know them.
So when you are talking about how the Crumbleys greeted their son or did not hug their son, it's fair to say that you are not aware, you've never really seen the Crumbleys greet their son on other occasions, correct?
Correct. I'm not making a judgment on normal. I'm simply stating what happened.
Okay, and that's completely fair. And I just want to confirm, though, that in terms of when you're making the observation, there was no hug or certain kind of greeting. You also haven't had the experience of seeing the Crumbleys greet their son on other occasions.
Correct.
And it's also fair to say that when parents come into the office, parents all may have a different reaction about their child being down in the counselor's office or in the principal's office, correct?
Well, first I would say those are two very different places.
Okay.
But no, you don't expect all parents to respond in the same way.
You get parents who are angry at their child as they're walking in the door, right?
Rarely.
Some people are coming in and have more of an anxious look.
They could.
Some parents may come in and just seem like this is no big deal.
Again, all parents could respond differently.
Okay, so there's any number of responses, and in the end, and if your training says any different, let me know. There is no right answer about specifically how a parent should respond to going to a school counselor's office or going to a school principal's office.
Yes, again, I stated I'm not making a judgment. I'm simply stating what
Thank you. Now, the dates that we talked about are dates where obviously through the course of this investigation, you identified emails where you were involved with Mrs. Crumbley's son. Is that a fair statement?
I'm not sure what your question is.
Did you provide the emails that we talked about and that were admitted as exhibits?
Did I provide them? The Oakland County Sheriff's Department had full access to my email.
Okay, did you at any point go through your emails to take a look at any emails related to Mrs. Crumbley's son?
On the night of the shooting, I did, with a police officer, go through and search for anything I could think of from that day and print and hand them to him.
Okay, and then ultimately, any of these other emails we've seen were discovered by law enforcement?
Yes, there's been a full cooperation with that.
Okay, and I'm not trying to allege you haven't been cooperative, I'm just asking that those emails, obviously, I imagine all your emails are stored on some kind of a system. Would that be?
Not my area.
Not mine either. This jury learned about my technology abilities on Friday. I want to just turn your attention to a couple of dates. On March 8th and March 9th of 2021, you didn't have any experiences with Mrs. Crumbley's son related to needing counseling or being called down to the principal's office, correct?
I don't remember.
Okay. On March 16th, which was a Tuesday, March 17th, Wednesday, 18th, or 19th, you don't have any incidents on those dates with regard to Mrs. Crumbley's son either.
I don't remember any.
Okay. If there had been incidents involving Mrs. Crumbley's son on these specific dates, would you assume they would have been included in the emails of all the other dates that were included about?
If there were emails of them, they would have been included.
Okay, so we don't have any emails of March 16th, 17th, 18th, or 19th, correct?
To my knowledge, no.
We didn't see any emails or concerns that arose from, well, this is a Saturday, so probably not likely, Saturday, March 20th, correct?
I don't know of any.
Sunday, April 4th?
I don't know of any.
Not even the next day, Monday, April 5th?
I don't know of any other meetings aside from the emails that have already been presented.
Okay, so then in all fairness, when I'm April 29th and November 4th, same thing, you don't have any awareness of any of these dates?
I don't know of anything specific towards those days.
Okay. Now, you testified that it was your hope that Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley would take their son home and get him into a counselor that day, correct?
Yes.
When you had that hope, you gave them a list of counselors to suggest they call, and noting which ones took various insurance programs, correct?
Yes, I provided a list of resources.
Now, in terms of getting a counseling appointment within one day, you don't have any knowledge if those counselors on that list could guarantee a same-day appointment, correct?
I don't know counselor schedules, and I can't speculate on what they would have had.
Is it fair to say that in the post-COVID time of 2021, mental health services have become more difficult to obtain appointments? And if you don't know and you're not the right person to ask, just let me know.
I don't work in community mental health, so I can't make that statement.
Have you personally had to call to schedule therapy type appointments for anyone?
I experienced a shooting. I called to cancel to get therapy for myself.
Okay, and when you called to get therapy for yourself, it was obviously a very, very urgent situation.
I mean, it was a pretty impactful situation, yes.
Okay, and did you end up seeing a counselor on the 30th?
No, I was cooperating with law enforcement and still in our building on the 30th.
Okay, so your appointment was sometime after the 30th, correct?
It was after the 30th.
And sometimes when you call to get a counseling appointment, it's not unusual to have to wait a couple of days or to schedule it, correct?
I think we're getting a little hypothetical with this, and I can't speculate on what's usual or not for counselors in this area.
That's fair enough. I appreciate that. When you were speaking with Mrs. Crumbley's son, it's fair to say that you and Mrs. Crumbley's son discussed whether he wanted to stay in school that day or go home prior to the arrival of Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley. Is that correct?
That did come up, yes.
And Mrs. Crumbley's son's position was, I want to stay in school, correct?
Correct.
COVID had been hard on him. He didn't like virtual learning. Was that your understanding?
He did state those two things, yes.
And there was discussion when the parents arrived that missing school is a source of anxiety for Mrs. Crumbley's son. Do you recall that?
I do.
So before Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley even got there, the option for Mrs. Crumbley's son to stay in school was on the table.
Well, there is no option of staying in school. School is a requirement unless you meet certain standards in which it is no longer available to you.
Okay, if a child gets sick at school, at Oxford High School, and vomits, okay, are they allowed to stay in school the rest of the day?
I don't know. That's not something I deal with.
Are you aware if a child has a temperature, if they are allowed to stay in school? And if you're not aware, let me know.
If they are allowed to stay in school?
Yes.
If we didn't, again, hypothetical, but not my area, I don't send students home.
Okay. Are you aware if the school will tell parents you need to take this child home if they are sick at school, physically sick?
The only time I remember that being a discussion was during COVID.
Okay, during COVID, were kids who were exposed to COVID allowed to be in school?
No, because we were following rules and regulations outside of the school.
So even if parents said, I want my child to be in school, he has COVID, but I want him to be there, that's not allowed, right?
Judge, I have to object to relevance now. We're awfully far afield.
Well, I think he said that that's not up to him. That's maybe,
Correct.
Is that up to like the school nurse or some person like
There
that?
is no school nurse. The COVID tracing was not through the school, that was through the county health department.
All I'm asking is, there are times where if a child is sick, it's not an option for them to be present in school.
When the county health department regulated that, yes.
And you testified that if there had been a discipline issue as to Mrs. Crumbley's son, that may have been grounds to make him have to go home that day, correct?
That could be the case depending on the discipline issue.
And in terms of the discipline issue, I realize you're not the discipline person, but the school has the option, depending on what's correct, they could suspend a student, they could expel a student. There's processes over school discipline, correct?
There is a process. I am not a part of that process.
It's your testimony, though, that in this case, the school did not find a discipline issue with respect to to Mrs. Crumbley's son.
That is correct. There was nothing that was determined as a discipline issue.
So it was not a discipline issue that he was looking up bullets on his cell phone during a class.
I would not be the one making that determination.
In this case, that was not something he was disciplined for by the school.
I already stated I was not a part of any potential disciplines. To my knowledge, no.
Same thing with watching videos on a phone. The school did not make a discipline issue that would cause Mrs. Crumbley's son to go home for sitting and watching videos on his phone during class, correct?
There was nothing that was determined to be a discipline issue.
And Mrs. Crumbley's son sitting and drawing on math paper instead of actually doing the math paper he's supposed to be doing, as far as you're aware, the school also didn't find there to be a disciplinary violation for that.
Judge, Mr. Hopkins already testified that discipline is in this area. That's Mr. Ejak's area.
He doesn't make that determination, he said.
I'll ask Mr. Ejak then when he testifies. Now, you did testify that one important thing was that you did not want Mrs. Crumbley's son to be alone after you thought he was so sad and experiencing so much sadness, correct?
I did not feel that it was wise for a student with signs that could be suicidal ideation and things that I saw as suicidal ideation to be alone.
Now, when you spoke to Mrs. Crumbley's son, he also wanted to be around other peers that afternoon.
He stated that he wanted to be in school. I don't remember him specifically stating anything about other peers.
Do you recall telling Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley that it would be good for him to be around other peers versus being alone?
I don't remember specifically stating that to them.
Is that something that you believe, and if you can't answer the question, just please let me know.
What is your question?
My question is that something that you believe, that it would have been better for him to be around peers that afternoon versus being left home alone?
It's the judgment call I made.
I'm sorry, what was that?
That is the judgment call I made, was that I felt it was better for him to be around peers and people who were his age than to be home alone.
Thank you. May I have just a moment, Your Honor? I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Hopkins.
Redirect.
Thank you. Mr. Hopkins, you were asked about the total picture by counsel, so I'd like to go through that with you. On November the 30th, when you met with Jennifer Crumbley, did she tell you that on March the 9th of 2021, her son had texted her that he was seeing demons and bowls flying off the shelf?
I did not.
Okay, so did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that on March the 17th, her son had also texted her that he was hallucinating?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that on March the 20th, he had texted his mother that he was hallucinating?
Your Honor, I would ask that the prosecution stop the leading questions.
Judge, I'm just trying to get through redirect in a timely fashion, and this is specifically in response to her.
I don't know how we can ask it another way.
I'm not suggesting the answer, Judge. I'm just.
Yeah, he's not suggesting the answer. He's asking a specific question. It's a yes or no question, right?
Thank you, Judge.
He's not suggesting the answer, so.
Thank you.
If you could read this last.
Sure. Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that her son texted her on March the 20th, 2021, that he was hallucinating?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that in April of 2001, she had told a friend of hers that she thought Ethan was depressed?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that she had referred to her son as weird?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that she had never once set an appointment with any mental health professional?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley ever tell you that his only hobby was involving firearms?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley ever tell you that she posted on Instagram as early as June of 2021 that he had obtained his own handgun?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley ever tell you that the day before the shooting at 3 o'clock in the morning, she herself was researching clinical depression options?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that she and her husband gave her son a 6-hour 9mm handgun just 4 days before the shooting?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley ever tell you that on November the 30th, 2021, it wasn't the first time he asked for help?
No.
Did Jennifer Crumbley ever tell you that the gun that he drew on that math worksheet was identical to the 6-hour 9mm handgun that was used in the shooting?
I object to the prosecution's characterization that drawing is identical. That's a conclusion that.
Sustained.
That's fine. Did Jennifer Crumbley ever tell you that the day before, on November the 29th, on that Monday, the day before, after the voicemail was left for her from Pam Fine, she texted her son and said, LOL, you have to learn not to get caught.
No,
Did Jennifer Crumbley ever tell you that James Crumbley worked for DoorDash and had no obligation to not take their son home?
no,
Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that on November the 30th, she was permitted to leave work when she needed for family issues?
no,
Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you that on November the 30th, the meeting she allegedly had in the afternoon, she was not required to attend?
no,
Did Jennifer Crumbley tell you ever that their son was struggling throughout the year 2021?
she confirmed it based on what he had said in regards to COVID and virtual school.
But they never went through these details.
Not these details, no.
So it took you all about 20 minutes to decide to request Jennifer Crumbley to come into the school immediately. That's what you testified to?
Yes,
Is that the total picture that you wish you had?
no,
Now, what if Jennifer Crumbley had told you all of these things I just went through?
Your Honor, objection is to speculation, and
Sustained.
hindsight is 2020.
Sustained.
Would you have liked to have as much information as you possibly could have?
absolutely.
Was their son still in the room in your office when the defendant said she couldn't take him home?
Yes,
Nothing further.
All right, you can step down. You're excused. You guys want a break? Okay, so we're gonna take like 10 minutes, okay?
All rise for the jury.
You may be seated. Who's next?
We need to confer. Sorry, I'm not trying to hide anything, we have some timing issues.
Okay.
Can I have just the option so I can get my folders at least out?
As soon as we know.
As soon as we know.
So this is, I'm
We
gonna
need to
have
make
to have,
sure we have the right person.
I'm gonna need like 3 minutes just to get my folders out when you do know, so.
Okay. All right.
We'll happy to give her time to get
They
it.
have to take her downstairs.
No problem.
allegations. What can you tell us?
So, Chris, earlier today we obtained this Israeli security dossier laying out the allegations. Clear. The dossier contains the